In 2015, researchers tested a 1,000-year-old Anglo-Saxon remedy against MRSA, one of the deadliest antibiotic-resistant superbugs on Earth. The recipe used garlic, leek, wine, and cow bile, brewed in brass for 9 days exactly as the manuscript instructed. And 90% of the bacteria died. None of the ingredients worked alone. Only the full medieval recipe proved effective. Which means so-called Dark Age England preserved a treatment modern hospitals still struggle to match against dangerous resistant infections. These were also people living where 1 in 3 children died young, malaria haunted the countryside, and theft could cost a hand. This is England. The year is 900 AD, and you would not survive even a single day here. Most people imagine Dark Age England as a muddy medieval blur. That is not entirely wrong, especially about the mud, but 900 AD is a precise moment. Alfred the Great has just died, and Edward the Elder inherits a fragile kingdom. Only 20 years earlier, England had nearly ceased to exist under the assault of the Great Heathen Army. That Viking coalition arrived in 865 and crushed nearly every Anglo-Saxon kingdom except Wessex, one by one. East Anglia fell, Mercia fell, Northumbria fell. King Edmund was captured, tortured, and killed. In 878, Alfred himself was driven into the Somerset marshes, hiding like a fugitive in swamp and woodland. The King of the English survived on raids and foraging, living in distress among the marshes like a hunted man. And that was less than a generation before the world you have just entered. England now held perhaps 1 to 2 million people, far below late Roman Britain population. That collapse may have been even worse than the Black Death, just stretched across a longer ruin. Half the country lay inside the Danelaw, under Scandinavian control north and east of a line from London to Chester, and you arrive with no Old English, no family, no lord, and no idea how this world works. Which brings us to breakfast. You are eating pottage morning and night, and probably wishing for anything else. It is a thick stew of barley or wheat with peas, beans, leeks, onions, and whatever else is available. Your house is a single timber-framed hall with wattle walls, a thatched roof, and no chimney at all. Smoke from the hearth rises through the roof, which means your entire home stays permanently hazy. The smoke helps preserve the roof and kill insects. Unfortunately, you are also breathing it every day. At West Stow in Suffolk, archaeologists uncovered dozens of these buildings and the halls that housed extended families. You sleep on straw mats rolled out at night. Sometimes your animals sleep beside you for warmth. There is no real line between your bedroom and your barn. A major Cambridge study challenged one of the biggest assumptions people make about medieval class and medieval food. Across more than 2,000 Anglo-Saxon skeletons, diet looked nearly identical at every social rank. Peasant or nobleman, you were eating almost the same thing. Most people were nearly vegetarian, because livestock were more valuable alive than dead. Cattle pulled plows and gave milk, sheep made wool, chickens laid eggs, only pigs were raised mainly for slaughter. Meat came rarely, often only a few times a year for ordinary people. November was called Blood Month, when animals were slaughtered before winter made feeding them impossible. The dramatic name came from desperation, not ritual. It was survival by preservation before the meat rotted. Even your carrots look different, small and purple-red, centuries before the orange variety existed. Honey was the only sweetener, because sugar was almost unknown in Western Europe. You are washing all this down with ale, and so is everyone else. Men, women, and children drank it, because the water itself could kill you. Parasites like roundworm and whipworm were nearly universal in contaminated water and soil. Ale made from barley without hops became the safer daily drink, though it tasted more like liquid bread. Most brewing was done by women, a fact still preserved in the surname Brewster. A 10th century school text says it plainly: I drink ale if I have it, water if I have no ale. That was not preference, that was survival logic. Even the word bridal comes from bride ale, and the toast meant be healthy, which was exactly the sort of blessing people here desperately needed. And now we reach the thing most likely to kill you. Not Vikings. Disease. The clock on that danger starts ticking the moment you are born. Life expectancy at birth hovered around 30 to 35 years, but that number hides the real horror. Somewhere between 30 and 50% of all children died before age 5. At Great Chesterford in Essex, 40% of preserved burials were children under 5. 4 out of every 10 graves dug for babies. That site is not unique because it was worse. It is unique because the infant bones survived, which means the real national numbers may have been even more terrible. If you survived childhood, the math changed dramatically. Some Anglo-Saxons lived into their 60s and 70s. The body itself has not changed in 1100 years. A 35-year life expectancy never meant everyone dropped dead at 35. It meant huge numbers never lived long enough to learn what 35 even felt like. For women, childbirth was among the deadliest events in life. Researchers estimate maternal mortality may have caused up to half of young female deaths. At one Northamptonshire site, only 29% of women were still alive at age 35. For men at the same site, the number was 54%. That is not a gap, that is an abyss. At Oakington, archaeologists found a young woman buried with a fetus lodged fatally across her pelvis. No caesarean section existed to save her. She died with the baby still inside her, and someone buried them together, because that was simply how life here ended sometimes. Beyond childbirth, disease ground people down without mercy. Tuberculosis circulated widely, leprosy had been present for centuries, and a massive study suggests malaria was endemic in the marshlands of eastern England. You could catch malaria in Suffolk, in England. That is not a sentence most people expect to hear about the Dark Ages. Parasites were nearly universal, and children often showed stunted growth, rickets, and chronic illness. At Warren Percy, one researcher said the children may have fared worse than Victorian workhouse children. That is the benchmark, Victorian slum childhood. And Anglo-Saxon children may have had it worse. Your teeth would mostly be free of cavities, because there was almost no sugar in the diet. But that was hardly a gift. Stone-ground flour filled daily bread with grit. That grit wore enamel down so aggressively it outpaced tooth decay itself. You would not avoid cavities because your teeth were healthy. You would avoid cavities because you no longer had enough enamel left to host them. And here the story takes a turn most people never see coming. The Anglo-Saxons were not helpless against illness. They had real medicine. Some of that medicine was effective even by modern standards. Bald Leech Book was a real medical text with symptoms, diagnoses, treatments, and prognoses. That is not random superstition. That is a genuine medical system. One chapter even records remedies sent from the Patriarch of Jerusalem to King Alfred. Medical knowledge was flowing internationally into what we lazily dismiss as a backward island. Anglo-Saxon surgeons also performed trepanation, drilling into the skull to relieve pressure. And most known British cases show signs the patient actually survived the procedure. That means people lived through holes cut into their skulls with primitive tools. The Leech Book may even preserve the only recorded plastic surgery from Anglo-Saxon England. Another text, the Lacnunga, mixed herbal remedies with Christian prayer and invocations to Woden. So Anglo-Saxon medicine was not ignorance, it was pharmacology, inherited learning, and magical thinking all at once. These people could kill MRSA with garlic and bile, and still believe chanting over a wound might help. Both of those things were true at the same time. That medical skill could not protect you from the legal system, or the Vikings, or what happened when you failed to pay a fine. Anglo-Saxon law was detailed, codified, and deeply unsettling. Every free person carried a price called wergild, literally man payment. A freeman was worth 200 shillings, a nobleman 1,200, a king vastly more. Killing someone did not always trigger vengeance, often it triggered payment. The entire system tried to replace revenge with accounting. Whether that counts as progress is another question. Alfred Laws priced injuries by body part with chilling precision. Lose an ear 30 shillings, a nose 60, an eye 50. A finger cost 9, a toe cost 20, a front tooth cost more than a back tooth. Castrating a man cost 80 shillings. That level of detail tells you something no chronicle states outright. People were losing fingers all the time. Some crimes were called bootless, meaning no payment could make them right. Arson, housebreaking, open theft, murder, and treachery to your lord all fell into that class. The penalty was death and total loss of property. Execution came by hanging, drowning, burning, stoning, cliffs, and frequent beheading. And archaeology confirms that this was not just legal theory. At Walkington Wold, excavators found an execution cemetery with 124 graves. Most were young men, many decapitated, some with severed hands and skulls separated from their bodies. Executions happened there every few years for centuries. At Ridgeway Hill, 54 Scandinavian men were found decapitated, their heads piled neatly to one side. Vikings, executed by Anglo-Saxons. Near Cambridge, another pit held bodies showing decapitation, bindings, and skulls likely displayed on stakes. One man there stood 6'5", enormous for his time, with a healed trepanation hole in his skull. Someone had operated on his brain. He survived. Then they killed him anyway. When courts could not determine guilt, they used trial by ordeal. That meant red-hot iron, boiling water, or being dropped into a pond. Sink, and you were innocent. Float, and you were guilty. Keep that logic in mind while remembering these were also the people curing Mercer with garlic. Collective responsibility shaped the whole legal order. Every male over 12 belonged to a tithing, 10 men answerable for one another's conduct. If one man fled after a crime, the other 9 paid the fine. The hue and cry required every villager to stop work and chase a fleeing criminal. Refuse, and you paid. Fail to pay, and your whole family could be enslaved. Roughly 10% of the population lived as slaves. Some were born into it, some were captured, some were convicted, some were sold by desperate families. Bristol exported enslaved people to Ireland, Scandinavia, Iceland, and Islamic Spain. One strange safeguard existed: forcing a slave to work on Sunday could free them automatically. The limits to the horror were real. They were simply placed in very specific places. And that brings us to the Vikings. By 900 AD, the immediate existential danger had receded, but the trauma remained. Alfred's victory at Edington saved Wessex, but it did not liberate England. It split it in half. The Danelaw boundary left whole regions under Scandinavian law and Scandinavian control. For ordinary people, the devastation was immense. The Chronicle says many were driven over the sea, and most of the rest were ridden down. Crops burned, livestock died, trade collapsed. Some people sold themselves into slavery just to stay alive. Alfred's response was extraordinary even by the standards of military genius. He built 33 fortified towns, spaced across the kingdom as a defensive network. About 6% of the entire population was assigned to defend them. He also reorganized the army into rotating units so farming and fighting could happen together. And he commissioned larger, stronger warships to challenge Viking vessels at sea. But his most important choice may not have been military at all. Alfred made people literate. He translated essential texts into Old English, founded schools, and tied survival to knowledge. He wrote that the saddest thing about a man is ignorance, and the most exciting thing is that he knows. A king who once hid in a swamp wrote that sentence. Alfred died in 899, and Edward the Elder continued the reconquest. But the most striking figure of the age may have been Alfred's daughter, Aethelflaed, Lady of the Mercians. She ruled Mercia, built fortified towns, and led campaigns against the Danes herself. Derby fell to her in 917, Leicester followed in 918. Even York submitted before her death that same year. At Tettenhall in 910, a joint West Saxon and Mercian army killed 3 Danish kings in one battle. That victory was coordinated by Edward and his sister together. After Tettenhall, the Northumbrian Danes never came south of the Humber again. And then there is the most human detail in this whole story. A monk complained that Danish men were irresistible to English women. Why? Because they combed their hair, bathed every Saturday, and changed their clothes. Saturday in Old Norse literally meant washing day. Anglo-Saxon women preferred men who washed. Anglo-Saxon men were furious about it. Some historians even connect that resentment to later anti-Danish violence. Jealousy over personal grooming may have fed into massacre. Which brings us back to you. You arrive in 900 AD England unable to speak Old English, which sounds nothing like modern English. You have no kindred, no extended family group, and therefore no legal protection. Nobody must demand payment if someone kills you. Nobody is required to shelter you. Without a lord, a tithing, or a family, you are almost legally invisible. You could be enslaved within hours of arrival. Even if someone helped you, your immune system would already be in trouble. You have no resistance to local tuberculosis, endemic parasites, or contaminated water. A simple cut could kill you, and the nearest hospital-like refuge is a monastery full of worms. Your house has no chimney, no glass windows, and sanitation little better than a pit in the ground. Your diet is grain, vegetables, and occasional pork. Your rights are nearly non-existent, and Viking-held territory sits only a day ride away. None of that means this was a world of savages. The Staffordshire hoard alone proves the opposite. Discovered in 2009, it remains the largest collection of Anglo-Saxon gold ever found. More than 5 kilograms of gold, over a kilogram of silver, and thousands of garnet pieces. The craftsmanship is staggering, and many of those garnets likely came from Sri Lanka or Afghanistan. Anglo-Saxon manuscripts used blue pigment from Afghan lapis lazuli. King Offa even copied an Abbasid dinar from Baghdad, Arabic script and all. These were not isolated people lost in ignorance. They were connected to trade routes stretching across the known world. Anglo-Saxon women could own land, sell property, divorce, and appear as legal witnesses. They held the same wergild as men of their class. After 1066, the Norman system erased all of those rights. A married woman who left her husband could be treated as stealing his property, meaning herself, and even her own clothes. It took until the 19th century for English law to restore rights Anglo-Saxon women once had. More than 1,000 pages of Old English medical writing survive from this period. That is more vernacular medical literature than any other European country produced at the time. And they also had humor. The Exeter book preserves around 90 riddles, many full of dirty double meanings. One sounds obscene and turns out to be bread dough. Another describes a one-eyed creature with 1,200 heads. It is just a garlic seller carrying a giant braid of bulbs. These people laughed. They joked by the fire after pottage and ale. They played hnefataf, raced horses, and listened to poetry about heroes and monsters. Human beings in inhuman conditions still found ways to make life bearable. Average Anglo-Saxon men stood about 5'8". After the